Hi everyone, Amber here from So Majestic. I am coming with you today with the coolest new pattern. This is called the Abracaduffle. It is from Carbon Chic. So thank you so much, Demi, for allowing me to test your pattern and to film a tutorial. So right now it is all folded up. And so on the front and the back, it looks the same. There are some exterior pockets and D-ring connectors. And it has a zipper that has gone all the way around. So if we open it up, it turns into the cutest duffel bag. And it's such a good size. I think it's perfect for like a weekend or an overnight, or if you have kids and they play sports. And the coolest thing is that there is a top zipper here. That's how you get into the bag. But I was able to store my crossbody strap inside and still be able to completely zip it up. So it makes it perfect for storage. I love the idea that it condenses down. So now let me show you the whole bag. So this is the front, which has a really cool feature with the zipper. This is the zipper that will condense it. And I am using some flower pools. And it's really cool because they dangle down. And I'm like, oh, it makes a really good design feature. And then on both exterior sides, there is a small zipper pocket. It's the same on both. And I love that the zipper is almost like a design feature and gives a pop of color here. And then inside, it's quite spacious. And on inside of the small sides, there's a small slip pocket. So you have two little slip pockets, and on the back, you have a full zipper pocket that goes all the way across. So I used our newest fabric. It's called Majestic Nylon. It is a nylon exterior, but has a bonded white backing. So in the pockets, your material is not interfaced. There's not an extra lining piece, so you will see the back side of whatever materials you use. So for this Majestic Nylon, it's nylon on the outside, and then it's bonded to like a soft white fabric. And then for all the lining, I used ripstop. And this was perfect because they are both super flexible. The Majestic Nylon does not wrinkle, which makes it perfect for this bag. And both are extremely thin and fold up very, very easily. So in the pattern, she does call for 1.5 inch straps. I just made them 1 inch because I used the same webbing as my accent piece here instead of like a gross grain ribbon or a separate piece of vinyl. But I have filmed the tutorial exactly as the pattern is written. I've included my own little thoughts as I've gone along that I hope will help you. In the description, I'm going to include timestamps, and I will also link to all of Demi's social media as well as where you can find this pattern. The other thing is the sides are bound. I originally was going to use fold over elastic, but my fold over elastic wasn't wide enough. So I switched it to the double fold bias tape, and it worked out perfect. The other thing too is that if you are in the United States, Carbon Chic, they are from Australia, and they do use the metric system. So if you need to convert it, it's so simple. You can just open up any search engine and just type in the amount like centimeters to inches. So for example, like 60 centimeters to inches, and you can convert all the measurements without any trouble. Demi does include all the full pattern pieces for you. And she's also a graphic designer, so they're really well done. Her whole pattern has diagrams that are extremely detailed. So I highly recommend her patterns if you haven't tested them out already. And I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Let me know if you make the Abracaduffle, because I'm definitely going to be making a lot more. Enjoy! All right, so the pieces are quite large, so I tried to fit them all in as best as I could. So I have my pieces cut for the mane, the upper back and lower back, the bottom, the inner pocket, the side pockets and lining, and then the interior side pockets. And so what I'm using for materials is this print from my shop. We're calling it Majestic Nylon. It has that nylon exterior, but it is bonded to a thin white fabric. So it's almost like a ripstop type feeling without the bumps on the exterior. I would say it's slightly thicker than quilting cotton, but not as thick as a waterproof canvas. And then I am using just a plain ripstop for the lining. This is just regular ripstop that I had bought at Joann's. So you want to use materials that are thin and that can squish up easily. And another thing about the exterior fabric is that it is waterproof and wrinkle resistant. So especially for this duffel bag where everything is going to get crinkled up, I thought it would be perfect. So there's a checklist in the pattern, or if you can see, I have some pieces that pink are the pattern pieces behind it. That's how I personally keep track of everything. You could use little sticky notes. So whatever you need to do to lay out all your pieces. So just double check that you have everything cut, because there are a lot. And like I said, some of them are quite large. The other thing I'll mention here is that I really recommend cutting your rectangle or square pieces using a rotary cutter and acrylic ruler if you can. That's normally not my preference, but for me, I have an HP printer and it leaves wider margins. So I did struggle a little bit putting the pattern pieces together, and that was not a problem with the pattern at all. It's because of the type of printer I have and the wide margins that I can't adjust. So a suggestion, if you're having that same trouble, just use the measurements. And the other thing is that Demi is from Australia. She uses centimeters, and you can easily just go onto a search engine, Google, and just put like centimeters to inches and convert anything that you need. So please don't feel stressed if you are from the United States and you're used to the imperial system with inches for measurement. And now, as far as hardware, I have my zipper tape. This is from Mormino. You're going to need almost 3 yards. So I have like exactly enough. You could mix and match zipper tape colors if you want as well. You're going to need 5 zipper pulls. So I'm going to use these poinsettia ones. We carry these in our shop. I am also going to use fold over elastic as my binding. And I have this 1-inch seatbelt webbing here. And I am going to use this for my handles and my strap connectors, but I'm also going to use it for the gross grain ribbon. So this becomes almost like a decorative trim that covers up the handles and such. So if you are using a machine and you're worried about thickness, I would use that gross grain ribbon. But this 1-inch seatbelt webbing just matches the bag so nicely that I'm going to use it as my accent piece. Demi also says that you could use a piece of vinyl, raw edge, something with raw edges that won't be a problem. So this is definitely something that you could make a different choice with, and I wanted to point that out. The other thing is, in the pattern, the connectors, I'm using 2 D rings, and you can also use triangle rings or square rings, but they are 1 inch. And then for the crossbody strap, she recommends a 1.5 inch. And I do not have any of this seatbelt webbing in 1.5. So I'm going to make my crossbody strap out of the 1 inch as well. So if you're doing it exactly like the pattern, you would have a 1.5 inch slider and snap hooks with webbing or whatever you'd like to use for that crossbody strap. But just to reiterate, I'm going to use this 1 inch webbing for all of those things. And now for supplies, I have plenty of clips. I am sewing with this Tex 35 thread from Wizardry Stitchery. It is their fairy floss. I love variegated thread, and I think this will match all the different colors in the bag. I am using a 9014 Microtex. It might be a little too big when I sew on just the ripstop for the lining. So if I need to, I'll put that at a 8012. But I'm going to try the 9014 just because that's my go-to needle that I usually use. I have a seam ripper stiletto combo, a pair of snips, and 3 different marking pens, a chalk one, a blue water-soluble, and then a silver marking pen, depending what I need to mark, and some double-sided tape. If I use any other tools as I go along, I'll let you know throughout the pattern. Okay, so our first step, we need our pattern piece 8. It's the internal pockets. It's our lining pieces. So I have 2 cut. I'm going to show you one. And I have it right side up. It's a little hard to tell, especially with ripstop. This one does not have texture. Sometimes it does, but it does look like it has texture. The back looks a little bit more, I guess, grainy to me. And that's how I can tell. But honestly, sometimes with ripstop, like if you can't really tell, I don't worry too much because it's so hard to distinguish depending on the type that you have. So our first step, we are going to fold it right sides together. So that's the sides that will be facing outwards. And I'm clipping it along the top and the right hand side. So we're going to take it to the machine and we're going to stitch along the top and then the right hand side at the seam allowance given in the pattern. Okay, so I've done a couple things. I've stitched across the top and the side like the pattern recommends. And there's 2 things that I'm going to add just that will help me, and I think it could help you too. We are going to have to tuck this left side in after we turn it to create an even side. And so I drew my seam allowance on, this is the exterior, so it won't be, the wrong side of the lining. So you won't see this. And this is just so that way when I fold it, I have a mark that I can really pay attention to, because otherwise I don't always fold these very evenly. The other thing that I'm going to do is we have to turn this. So I'm just going to trim down my seam allowance and then cut my corner at an angle. And so this way that corner will pop out and look a little bit nicer with that corner at an angle. Otherwise it can get a little bulky, right? So now we can turn this right side out. And I just have a chopstick from Takeout that I use to run along my seams and poke out my corners. So you want to make sure that everything's poked out really, really well. So now we are turning, this is what it will look like. We want where we sewed that top seam, we want that now on the bottom. So our opening is on the left-hand side and our lining should be right sides facing out. And so now I have drew that chalk line in because we are tucking our seam allowances in. And so at least now I have that chalk line I can fold down on. And I should have drew it on both sides of the lining. I only did it on one. So what I'm going to do is I'm clipping it here to hold that. Because then if I have one side at least at the correct measurement, I can kind of tug and help fold this side down to match up. So otherwise, if I didn't have that line drawn of my seam allowance, I wouldn't really know where to turn it down to. And that's just me trying to create as nice of an even straight side as possible, because I know if I didn't draw that, that would be like lumpy and crooked. So the other thing that I want to do is, again, our seam that we had sewed is on the bottom and the right, so our opening's on the left. In the pattern, Demi has us attach this to our lining, which closes up the sides. But before I do that, I like having top stitches across my pocket. That, as of right now, is not written into the pattern, and I don't know if it will be. So I'm going to add a top stitch across the top part of this pocket here. All right, so I have just top stitch, and this is, again, not required. I just prefer that look. So I've done a couple things. I have marked my center in chalk. Chalk is my favorite if I'm able to use it on the material because it just wipes off so easy. And then you need one of your pattern piece 5, which is your side panel linings. Now, so in the pattern, she has us just kind of center it wherever we think it looks nice. It doesn't need to be a specific measurement. So I have marked my center of my pocket, the center of my pattern piece 5, and I played around, and I drew a line up with about 2 inches from the bottom, because you got to remember we're going to be binding everything. So you don't want your pocket on the very bottom, because one, it will make your seam thicker, and 2, you'll lose pocket space. So I chose to draw my line about 2 inches above, and I also marked the center so I can easily find the center of my pocket. So if you are using a material that you can pin, definitely go ahead and pin it. Honestly, I just have some Scotch tape here that I am going to put on the side and kind of hold it in place. I probably shouldn't have taped it all the way down because I'm going to start on the side and do it like this. And it doesn't hold anything like permanently. It's not going to leave residue. You definitely don't want to leave it overnight, but it holds it enough that I could just take it to my machine. So now we are going to top stitch around both sides and the bottom. So 3 sides. I'm going to come down on the right, across the bottom, up on the left. Make sure that when you begin and end, you backstitch really well, because this is what's holding on your pocket. And so when we top stitch, we're going to close up that left side seam that we have open. So that finishes up our pocket. It is stitched on. So now we have this nice slip pocket and our turning hole is closed. And we're going to repeat the steps for the other lining pocket piece and the piece 5 for the side. But I'm going to do this one a little bit differently just to show you another way to make a slip pocket. It's, again, personal preference, but I figured I'd show you here too. So that first way was as according to the pattern. And now for this way here, I'm, again, folding it right sides together and clipping all the way around. And so what I'm going to do is sew on all 3 sides. I'm going to start here, come to the bottom, but I'm going to leave a turning hole in the bottom. So I'm going to backstitch here about this clip, lift my needle, and then start again here, backstitching at the beginning, and then continue around the side at the seam allowance given in the pattern. All right, so now I have stitched my pocket with the turning hole in the bottom. So now I'm just clipping my corners at the diagonal, which makes it easier to turn. I'm doing that for all 4 corners. And then I'm trimming down the seam allowance on the left and right sides. And you can trim it on the bottom, but you don't want to trim where that opening is. So I'm just kind of snipping it at like an angle, leaving the seam allowance longer here. And then coming up the side. And then, so now I'm turning it through that bottom turning hole. And again, using the chopstick to poke out the corners, and I also like to run it along all the seams because that helps poke them out as well. Sometimes they don't always align as easily. So for this one, you have all 4 corners that you have to poke out. Okay, and so if you are using directional fabric, again, you want to be mindful. I still have my turning hole in the bottom. I'm not worried about that yet. I am going to take it to the machine and do my top stitch along the top here. All right, so now I have just top stitched. So I have my turning hole, and then what I do is I usually just stick my pointer fingers in and then tug. And for this, it's a little different from when the whole side was open because we have sewed a little bit on the left and right already. When you give it a tug, the seam allowance kind of naturally folds in to the correct amount. And so I am just going to clip that closed. Or mostly closed, because now we're going to attach it in the same manner. So I'm going to do the same method that I did. I'm going to fold it in half, find my center, put my measurement, tape it down, and then stitch on all 3 sides. And the only difference is that with this one now, our opening is on the bottom. So when we go along the bottom, we'll be closing it up there. And like I said, I'm going to do that part off camera because it's the same way as we did the previous. All right, so I have both pockets finished. And I don't think you can really tell the difference between which one was which one I did first or second. And we can set these to the side because now we need our upper back panel and our back pocket lining piece. And we are also going to need zipper tape. Okay, so I have my upper back panel piece, and then I have my back pocket lining piece, and then I have my zipper tape for the back panel. Right now it's cut exactly the same width. Normally I like to leave a little bit of overhang, but when I was doing my measurements, I only had exactly enough zipper tape. So that's why it's completely even. So I also left my pull off right now. Demi recommends that. It makes it so you don't have to worry about moving your pull out of the way. So we are going to put our zipper tape with the teeth side down on the bottom of our upper back panel. And if you have a directional print, you want to make sure that you have it facing the correct direction. That's really important. Now the other thing is, when I sew my bags, I like to baste my zipper on first and then put my lining. So we're going to cover this with the lining, and we are going to take, so you're going to take that lining and you want to put it right sides together. So your wrong side of your lining should be facing up, your zipper sandwiched between. Just because I want to baste this first, I'm going to do that. So I'm just lining up the edge. If you are one of the people who are like, I can't get my zipper pulls on afterwards and already have it on and are like, okay, I'll just move it as I'm sewing. One tip that I always give is that you want to move your zipper pull out of the way while you're clipping as well. Because if you don't, you'll have that same bubble clipped into your zipper tape. So I'm just going to take this to the machine and base stitch my zipper on here first. All right, so I forgot to hit record when I stitched this. So I have just basted my zipper on. And that's, again, just because I like to make sure that it doesn't wiggle. And sometimes when I'm doing my 2 layers at once, that happens. So again, we have our upper back panel, right side facing up, our zipper with the zipper teeth down along the bottom. And now we're going to take our upper back panel lining and put it right sides together. So this is the wrong side of my material. The zipper will be sandwiched in between, and then I have the right side of my exterior facing up. Okay, I'm going to take this to the machine, and now I'm going to sew this using a zipper foot at the given seam allowance. All right, so I have just stitched with my seam allowance. So now we are going to flip this. So basically I'm pulling my bottom piece and moving it up. And this way the wrong sides of our fabrics will be together. So you should see your zipper tape, you'll see your pocket panel, and then you'll have a little bit of the lining sticking out above. That is correct. And it seems like, oh, we should top stitch. You are not top stitching here, so don't make that mistake. And now we're going to grab our lower back panel. So I have grabbed my lower back panel. I have it laid down right side facing up, facing the direction it's supposed to go. And I have the piece that we just sewed above it. So now we need to place this panel right sides together with this zipper. If you are using a directional print, you want to be very, very mindful. So for me, the way I cut this, the flowers actually line up. You can see where the pattern lines up. So if you are using directional, what I do to make sure it's correct is I flip it up like this. So we want to put our top part, our top side of our back panel right side down onto this zipper. And this piece here does not have a lining that we are adding to it. So for this, after I'm done clipping it, I'm going to take it to the machine and stitch at the given seam allowance all down this side of the zipper tape. So again, if you already have your pull on, make sure that you are moving it out of the way, both when you're clipping and stitching. So I'm going to bring it to the machine and stitch at my given seam allowance with my zipper foot. All right, so I have just stitched along that bottom edge. So now we are going to flip open that panel. So our top panel and the lining should still be facing up, and our bottom panel only should be facing towards you open. And there's no lining underneath that. It's really important because now we are going to take this to the machine and top stitch. You want to make sure that you're only top stitching through this bottom panel piece here. And I top stitch by just using my regular zipper foot and aligning the inside little hole that you can see along the fabric. All right, so I have just top stitched along the bottom of the panel. And so now we're going to start working on our handles, but there's a couple things we need to do. The first thing I'm going to do, so I don't forget, is to flip this lining side down because we do not want to accidentally sew through that. So this side now should only have our top panel up top. And there's two markings. I'm not sure if you can see it. I use a silver marking pen. It's right here and right here. It's really hard to see on camera. So you can do those markings a couple ways. They are on the pattern piece already, so you can just use the pattern piece to align it. Or on the next instruction page, or there, yeah, the next instruction page, page 9, it gives you that measurement. It is in centimeters. Go and search it. Just put centimeters to inches and it will tell you the exact amount. And I did not make them super long. I only made them about 3/4 of an inch tall because we're going to put a ribbon over this. And I had to use silver marking pen, which does not come off this material. So in order to do that, I only made them 3/4 of an inch because they're going to be hidden by our gross grain ribbon. And so like I said before, I'm going to use this webbing. You could use gross grain ribbon, you could use a raw edge vinyl, you could use lace, whatever your preference is. And so we are going to line it up with the edge. So as I'm sewing, I'm going to kind of really pull and flatten this. But basically we are lining up our edge here, and we are top stitching along the bottom only of this piece. We don't want to sew the top because our handles are going to get put behind this. So I'm clipping both my left and right side, but as I'm sewing, I'm going to be adjusting this because I don't want my fabric to show at all. So I'm going to take this to the machine and again, top stitch only along that bottom edge. Leave this top so we can pull it forward. Okay, so I have just stitched on my webbing or the ribbon. I think next time what I would do is maybe hold it with some double-sided tape. I didn't think about it. On the left side here, you can see it's a little bit lower, covers more zipper tape than the right, but I checked it with my zipper pull and it doesn't interfere. So even though you see a little bit less zipper tape over here, I'm not going to unpick it. All right, so now we're going to attach our handles, and you might be like, well, why is your right side attached already? Because I realized when I aligned it wrong. So make sure you use converting if you need this measurement for handle in inches. So I have cut them out, and we are going to sew them on by making a box. And you get the measurement for how far up to make that box. So I actually drew that on with chalk. So on the back side, I'm just going to put a piece of double-sided tape to help me. And that's because it's going to stick in place, and that way I don't have to worry about, because it's going to be in the middle here, and I don't want to have to worry about pinning or anything. And so I'm just peeling that off. And now you already should have markings on your material. There is a given measurement from the left-hand side in and the right-hand side in. And if you look really, really closely, I have marked them here in silver marking pen. It's very, very hard to see. I tried doing the chalk, but the chalk just doesn't stick that well to this silky type fabric, the nylon fabric. So my problem is that, what I did wrong is I aligned it with the inside edge. We want to align our webbing with the left-hand side, the outside edge. So that was what I did wrong that first time. So I'm just aligning it here, pushing as far down as I can go and sticking it into place. And that double-sided tape is going to help hold it. So now I'm going to take it to the machine, and I'm going to start on one side, come across on that line and down the other. So you can see that you're going to see some of your stitching here. But what I'm going to do, and you can see it on this side, is I've added a couple rows of horizontal stitching with a lot of back stitches because, you know, this is going to carry weight, so I want it to hold really well. I added a couple rows of horizontal because this is going to fold up and hide it. So that's what we're going to do for both sides. So when you're doing your handles, you want to make sure the outer side is aligned with that line, not the inner. And in case you're ever using fabric like this, I had to pick it apart and you can't really see any of the stitches. So I'm very happy about that. Okay, so I'm going to take it to the machine and do my box, making sure that I'm not catching this lining, that it's not moving up or getting in my way. All right, so I have just finished stitching that on. I've added 2 horizontal lines of stitching with lots of back stitching. And then this is what it looks like from the back after both are done. Okay, and so now that both of our handle sides are stitched and they're stitched at the appropriate measurements, we are going to go to the machine and top stitch this top part of our webbing down, or whatever material you're using here. So you want to make sure you're using a large stitch length and stitching all the way across that top. Also making sure that your lining, pocket lining is down so you're not stitching through that as well. All right, so I have just top stitched down that top part of our accent piece or ribbon, webbing, whatever you choose to use. And so now we are going to add our pull, and I want it to open left to right. So I'm adding from my right hand side. I've pulled the lining out of the way so I can manipulate this better. So I'm right-handed, so I start by putting a tooth or two on the right hand side and then put on the left and try to get them balanced. It's a little bit tricky with, I think the finish of antique bronze sometimes makes it a little bit more difficult for me. There we go. So once I can see that they are mostly aligned, even if you get a little bubble, it will come out. I'm just trying to avoid that. You can see, I think my right hand side's a tiny bit too high. So I'm just trying to straighten it out. There we go. So usually once it's even, I can push it on with my pointer fairly easy. But this one's giving me a little bit of trouble. See, my right hand side's a little bit too high, so it's creating this bubble, but that will come out when I go all the way to the end, or if you want to take it back off and redo it, you can. It's not a big problem. It would be a problem if I had like a sewn in like a zipper box, but because this is going to all the way to the edge, it will work itself out. Okay, so here I have the front main panel and the bottom panel, and I have chalked on all the markings. It's a little bit difficult to see down here, but just so you're mindful that these lines are not going to line up exactly right now, and that's because of the seam allowance. So we have our zipper marking, we have our trim up top, and I've also marked for the verticals for the handles. So you want to try to transfer this as best as you can. Make sure you are using a water soluble or something that's going to be able to come off, because you might not be able to cover all these markings exactly. All right, so we need our completed back panel, and you can see here where my lining is sticking out a little bit. If yours shifts, this can all be corrected in the seam allowance when we sew on the gusset. So I am not worried about that. What we need to do now is, this is my bottom piece. I have my two chalk lines, and even though this is directional, this is the back. I need it directional with the front. So I am flipping this around, or I want it directional with the front, and I want it so that way the lines that I have chopped in are pointing down. That's how you'll know that it's done correctly. So we are going to flip these right sides together, and I'm going to clip along the bottom here, and I'm clipping through the lining and my exterior. Let me start in the middle. The fabric is a little bit slippery, so this way I can follow it across. And then once you have them clipped, you're going to take this to the machine, and you are going to stitch along the bottom here at the seam allowance given in the pattern. All right, so I have just stitched the bottom piece to the back. So now I'm going to fold this open, and it gets to be a lot of material. So this is my bottom panel here, and I have my front panel, and I want it aligned so that way the diagonal is pointing down, and I'm going to put that right sides together. So I had that diagonal pointing down, and I just flipped it up to be able to align my edges, and I am just going to clip that into place, and we are going to stitch just like we did for the other side of the bottom panel. We're going to stitch along the bottom here at the seam allowance given in the pattern. right, so this is my front main panel. I had just sewed along the bottom, and now you can see that I've opened it up. So I'm going to take this to the machine, and I'm going to top stitch along this bottom panel, making sure that I press my seam allowances inside towards the bottom panel. So I'm going to top stitch down the left and the right hand side with the seam allowances pointing towards the center. All right, so I have just top stitched down each side of the bottom, and the seam allowances are pressed towards the center. And so now I'm going to turn this so that way the triangle is pointing up. And I'm going to grab my continuous zipper. So that's the largest zipper that we have. All right, so I have grabbed my collapsing zipper. I think I said continuous, but it's actually called collapsing. And I'm just singeing the edges, which are going to make it easier for me to put the pull on. And we are going to add our zipper pull. And again, I just do this by hand. Hopefully it's not too bad. The left-hand side's a little bit higher on this one. It doesn't need to be perfect because this zipper is going to open. So if you have like a bubble, that's not a problem. So we're not opening it yet, but here I have my front main panel. You can see the triangle. We are going to take our zipper and center it between our two diagonal lines. Your zipper tape should fit like perfectly inside. So we're going to put it slightly above this bottom horizontal line that will eventually be covered with the webbing or ribbon. And I'm going to base it into place by just back stitching over the teeth. And you don't want to go too far into the tape because that will allow it or not allow your zipper to lay flat. So I'm only going to go over the teeth. All right, so I have just basted my teeth here. And now you want to pull your pull up as far as it can go. And we're going to open the rest of our zipper tape. So now we need to align the edge of our zipper tape with our marking here. And so you can see that there's going to be a little bit of a fold. What you can try to do is put that fold up into like above into where we're going to be covering it. And that's why we only wanted to do teeth. So if you have a slight bubble here, it might be because you sewed too far into the zipper tape. It's not going to be that noticeable, so don't stress it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to line the edge of the tape with our marking all the way down. If you want to pin or clip it, you can. I think what I'm going to do is honestly just hold it in place and stitch all the way down. But you don't want to go all the way to the end. You want to stop stitching when you get to the seam allowance. So I used my silver marking pen and I made a little mark on each side where the seam allowance is so I know where to stop my stitching. And I'm going to do that for both right and left sides of the zipper tape. All right, so I have just top stitched along each side. It was a little tricky to keep it, lined up. I don't recommend double-sided tape because you might get stickiness here. So holding it did work for me, and I made sure I didn't go all the way to the end. I stopped at those seam allowances. And you can see that up here, I hid where the zipper tape is going to get a little fold in where it's going to be covered by the webbing later on. If you're using cotton, definitely pin the zipper down. And for now, I'm going to set this to the side because we need our remaining linings for the front and the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of roll this up and set it to the side. All right, so I have my two main lining pieces and my bottom lining. All of them are right side facing up. So we're going to do it similar to how we assembled the exterior. I'm going to move one to the side for now. So I have one main right side facing up, and I'm going to put the bottom right side facing down. You can mark the centers. I'm just lining them up, making sure my ends are matched up, and then we'll go across. It's so slippery because it's the ripstop, and it's like not interface, so it's also super thin. Okay, and now I'm going to raise the machine and stitch across the bottom at the given seam allowance. Alright, so I have just stitched along the bottom here. So now I'm going to fold that bottom open. Just move it up so you can see. I have my last main lining piece right side facing up, and I'm also going to put that now right side facing down. And again, it's so hard to tell with ripstop, but you want to make sure that you have your right sides facing together if you are using prints where it's more noticeable. So again, I'm going to take it to the machine and stitch along the bottom here. Okay, so now I had just stitched the seam allowance on this bottom one, and I am folding it open. I'm turning it horizontal so it fits better in the frame of the camera. So now I'm going to push my seam allowances of this bottom centerpiece in, and I'm going to top stitch on the bottom piece on the sides here, making sure that I am going through my seam allowance. It's the same exact thing we did for the exterior. We're just now doing it for the lining. All right, so I have just top stitched down both sides, and I am loving the look of the variegated fairy floss against the black ripstop. And I am going to move this to the side because we are going to need our exterior. We're going to put our second handle on and our webbing across, or the gross grain. So go ahead and grab that stuff that you'll need. All right, so we are working on the side where we have attached our zipper. You should already have it laid out, the lines. What I'm going to do this time for myself to make it easier is I'm going to put some double-sided tape all the way across because that's going to help me hold that webbing strip down, or if you have gross grain ribbon, whatever you're using for this part. Because last time that's where it had shifted a little bit on my zipper tape, although this time there's not a zipper underneath going horizontally, so you won't really notice if it shifts a tiny bit. Sorry, sometimes I have so much trouble getting that started. And this scrap piece of webbing is almost the perfect size, just slightly longer. So I moved my pole down just a tiny bit to give me a little bit of wiggle room. You don't want to go too far because then your bag's going to start scrunching up. And so we have that horizontal line, and I am just lining it up with my horizontal line. If it shows a little bit on the top or the bottom, I drew mine in chalk, so it's not a problem. I can just wipe it off. Okay. So now I'm going to take it to the machine, and just like we did the last time, I'm only going to top stitch along the bottom because we're going to have to peel this forward in order to do the handles again. So again, I'm just going to top stitch along the bottom side of this webbing piece. All right, so I have just top stitched across the bottom of that webbing piece, or that accent piece. I didn't trim my edges yet. I'm going to wait till I am done. Now we are adding our handle. So I'm doing it the same exact way. I have my chalk markings. I have already put my vertical marks here. So we want to, I don't want to make the same mistake. So I'm making sure I'm lining up the left-hand side of my webbing on the left with that chalk mark. And then the right hand side over here will be on this side of the chalk mark. The chalk mark's on the outer edge. And again, I am going to peel this forward. I'm going to use double-sided tape. I'm going to stitch around that box and then add a couple rows of stitching for the handles. It's the same exact method as the first one. So I'm just going to repeat that and not film it because, like I said, it's the same exact method. All right, so I have just stitched my handle down with that box stitch, and I did 2 horizontal lines of stitching just to help secure it where it's going to be hidden by this horizontal piece. The one thing I will say is just be careful when you are starting at the bottom. It kept wanting to like kind of fold back on the seam where I had stitched across, and I think it's because it's webbing that I'm using. So if you're using a thicker material, it might do that on you. A thinner one probably not. So just be mindful when you're back stitching on the bottom. And I made sure that I lined up my edges and the vertical marks are towards the outside. And so now I already have my double-sided tape. So I'm just going to press this down and take it back to the machine and top stitch across the top. I'm not going to film that because it's the same step as we did before. All right, so I have just top stitched down my webbing piece and that handle is secure. So now I'm just going to trim the webbing on each side. And I only left that overhanging because that was the exact amount of webbing I had left as the scrap piece. Okay, and I'm going to keep this here because we need this, but I'm going to grab my top zipper. So that's your next longest one that is going to match up to the top of your duffel bag. All right, so I have my top zipper. I do not have my pulls on yet, and that's because we need to open this up, and we are going to align this to our short sides of our duffel main exterior. So I'm putting it teeth side down, so right side facing down, and I am lining up the tape to the edge. And then you are going to flip this around. It's a very long piece that we have. And you are going to do the same exact thing. So again, teeth side down and aligning it with the top. And I'm going to take it to the machine and baste stitch this into place. I'm not using my zipper foot yet. I'm just basting it into place because I'll use my zipper foot when we get to adding the lining. So you should have this to your both short sides, and again stitching, just basting on your zipper tape. All right, so I have basted my my zipper on the left side and the right, which is the 2 short sides. And again, the zipper teeth are right side facing down. And I have put this horizontally because now we need our lining, and we need to put it right side facing down. I'm just trimming. I just noticed that some of the threads got caught. And honestly, you wouldn't even see this, but it's the back side. Okay, so our lining is right side facing down. So our right sides are together. And I am going to align both of the short sides. So we don't need to clip these longer sides. So in order to clip them, I'm just turning them so I can see it better. And I'm holding it up so I can make sure that the edge is aligned. And that's because this, like I said before, it's so thin and slippery that I want to make sure that I am catching this all. And you're going to do this for the other short side where the other part of the zipper tape is. And then you're going to bring them to the machine and you are going to stitch on both of them at the seam allowance given. And this is now where I'm going to use my full seam allowance and use my zipper foot. So I'm doing it for this short side, and I'm going to clip this one up here and do it for that one as well. All right, so I have just stitched each short edge on the lining using my zipper foot at the full seam allowance. So now we are going to turn this right side facing out, which is super easy. It just flips right around because we have the big openings. And now what I'm going to do is at the top on each side, I am going to top stitch along the zipper tape here. So I'm going to make sure I'm pulling back my lining nice and tight, top stitching on this side here and on the bottom side here. All right, so I have just top stitched on both sides of my zipper. So now we need to add our pull. And so I have the continuous zipper here as the front. This is the back pocket with a zipper. So I want my pull opening left to right. So I'm going to put it on the right hand side. So again, starting with the right tooth and hope that one just slipped off. This one is a little bit trickier, you can see, because for me anyways, because the zipper tape is apart from each other, sometimes when it's still next to each other, it gives it a little bit of like sturdiness as I'm trying to align it. But there we go. And you want to make sure that your zipper pull goes all the way across and that it's not getting caught in your lining. I have done that before where the lining comes up too far and then your zipper pull gets stuck. All right. All right, so you might want to baste your zipper over here so it doesn't open up. But what we're going to do is on each of the circular sides, clip our lining just to the edge of our exterior so we can baste them into place. This is going to make it easier for us later on, and especially because I'm using these slippery materials. Sometimes I don't baste lining to, oh, see, here's a perfect example of why. I didn't even catch this over here because it's so slippery. But yeah, with these slippery materials, I definitely am basting this. And so again, you're going to clip all the way around on both sides. You can take it to the machine and just base stitch. So that means do like a very large stitch length. I use a 4, the same as my top stitching. And I go about 1/8 of an inch in. You don't want to use your full seam allowance because we don't want that stitching to show later on. So you can see I have it base stitched or flipped over here. I'm going to base stitch it and do the same on the other side. Okay, so I have just base stitched my lining to my exterior on both sides. It matched up perfectly for me. If you need to kind of ease some of your fabric in, that's okay, but it should line up really well. If it doesn't, it could be your measurements, but also depending on your zipper tape, that could, or your seam allowance could throw it off a tiny bit. But anything that's off, you should be able to gently like distribute it around. So now what we need to do is we have our collapsible zipper here, and I've pulled it all the way apart because now we need to put it around the sides. So I'm going to start with the right hand side, and I am just turning this at an angle and lining it up with the edge. So the edge of the zipper tape is lined up to the edge where we have just base stitched them together. So now we are going to clip all the way around, running our zipper tape around this edge continuously. And take your time clipping. So you can see my lining is sticking out a little bit. I'm lining it up with the exterior, and I can trim that excess lining away later on, because these edges will eventually be bound. So I want those sides even. And that came from when I was cutting, the stuff is so slippery. So my lining was slightly a lot bigger than my exterior. And we're clipping all the way. We're almost back where we started. So I'm going to clip all the way down. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start here, base stitch it on. I'm not using my zipper foot because we're going to do a larger seam allowance later. I just need to hold it. I'm going to go all the way around. And when I get back to this, I am going to bring it down, except for when these teeth intersect, when I get here, I'm going to put my needle down, and I am going to you're going to turn this at a 90-degree angle. But if I do that, you see how I get the fold up top? I'm going to put that fold underneath and pinch my teeth to the side. If you want, you could even do that now and kind of clip it and hold it into place. So it's, again, go all the way around. When you get to this side here, put your needle down and turn your teeth 90 degrees, and then you're going to back stitch over that. I think when I get to that part, I will film this in regular speed. That way you can see what I'm doing. All right, so you can see I'm coming up to the end here. I'm back where I started. So I'm bringing this down. Still making sure that the edge of my zipper tape is lined up. And then again, right here, when I get to, I have my needle down, so I'm going to lift my presser foot to make it a little bit easier, because I want to fold this underneath. And it's a little bit harder to do at the machine. I'm trying to fit with my fingers. So I definitely recommend taking like a stiletto, or I'm using the pointy part of the seam ripper, and I'm kind of just holding it here and then trying to pinch my zipper tape at that 90-degree fold. And I'm just going to hand crank for a second. I'm actually going to use if you have the stiletto, I just don't feel like taking out the other side. I'm just using my seam ripper, something pointy to kind of hold that. And then, okay, I'm over my teeth, and that kept it so it doesn't spring back on me. And then I'm going to just backstitch.
So it is at a 90 degree. It slipped a little bit, so it's a little bit less than 90 degree, but that's okay. It's more important that it comes up to the tape here, and this little fold will get hidden later on in the seam allowance. All right, so I have stitched it all the way around. I have the zipper off at the 90. Mine moves slightly, so it's not exactly straight, but that's okay. And so now we're just going to repeat it for our other side over here. And it's the same exact steps, matching it up, going all the way around. So I'm going to do that part off camera because it's the same as we did on the other side. All right, so I just finished the left side. For me, I was able to sew this in the round on the arm. So the left side was a little bit more tricky. What I did is I just put this like in the throat of my machine and sewed from the right hand side and just kept feeding it around. So both of them now have that 90 degree turn, which means when this comes through, I'll just show you now so you understand why we just did all that. And this is why we have that soft or easily flexible material, because it should squish up. Yeah. And so you can tell that you did this part right if you go all the way to the end and your teeth are turned and your zipper pull is not coming off. So now I'm going to set this to the side and grab my side panel pieces, my D-ring connectors, if you are going to put connectors for a crossbody strap or, you know, a long strap. And then also the zipper tape for both of my side panels. All right, so I have my two D-ring connectors straps cut. This is going to get kind of thick because we're going to fold it over onto itself. And then it's going to have, what's going to happen is it's going to be basted here, and then it's going to have the trim over it. So if your machine can't handle a lot of thickness, I don't know if I recommend using webbing. You might want like a thinner material. Mine will be able to go through 3 layers of seatbelt webbing plus the material here. So what we're going to do first though is I have my D-ring connectors, and we are just going to put them on and base stitch the bottom. So that way these don't slide off on us or give us any trouble as we're trying to attach them to our side pocket. So I'm just going to base stitch along the bottom here. Now I have my side half of my pocket panel, and I have my D-ring connectors that I have just basted, and I have drew the straps on, the line where that webbing strap is going to cover, or ribbon, or whatever you're using. And I have a vertical line here for my center. So you can use some double-sided tape to put on the back. I'm probably just going to hold this, and we're going to take it to the machine. And so you're centering your D-ring. You want it a little bit above that line so it's not in the seam allowance. And then we're going to bring it to the machine and stitch a box around. And just like I did with the handles, I'm going to add an extra row, horizontal row of stitching here, which will be hidden. That way it leaves my connector extra secure. Okay, so I have just stitched on the D-ring. I did my square, and there's not really a measurement given for how big this square should be. I just went horizontal once I got to a part where I knew my presser foot would get in the way. And then I did 2 extra lines of horizontal stitching, which is going to be hidden by our strap our accent piece that's going across. And so now you need one of your shorter zippers, and you are going to put it right side down, so teeth side down. And you can see this is what I had left over for zipper tape after cutting it all. So this one I did leave an overhang on the edge. So I'm just lining up the edge here, and then I am going to take this to the machine and just base stitch this into place. We're going to be, or sorry, not base stitch. We're going to stitch it into place using the seam allowance that was given in the pattern. So I'm going to switch to my zipper foot. All right, so I have just stitched my zipper on the bottom. So now we are going to fold so our zipper is open. And I am going to put this bottom panel right sides down. So what I'm doing is I flipped it up so I can line up the sides on the left and the right to make sure that it's even. And then I'm just going to clip across. And the same exact thing. We're going to stitch at this given seam allowance using our zipper foot going all the way across. All right, so I have just stitched along the bottom. So now we are going to fold this down and press it open. And we are going to top stitch along the bottom panel here. We're not doing the top, only the bottom. So along that edge. All right, so I have just top stitched down on this bottom piece, and that's what it looks like from the back. And then on the front here, we need to add our trim. So I'm adding my webbing or ribbon, whatever you're using. I cut it a little bit wider, and I have my line drawn still, and I put some double-sided tape. So I'm going to line this up. Basically, my line on the bottom was where this edge was. So I'm just matching it up to the edge. And then by doing that, it does fall into where I had drawn my chalk lines. And so this is where you can see in the center, it's going to get a little bit thick here. My machine will be fine on the webbing, but that's why I said you might want to consider something different. If you are using these strap connectors on the side, the gross grain ribbon would probably work better for this. All right, so once you have that webbing across, you need to add your pull. Mine's going to be a little difficult because I base stitched on my lining and then realized I never put on my pull. So I just unpicked it. Right now, you should not have your lining base stitched on it all, so it shouldn't be an issue. So just like all the other times, we're opening it up, adding our pull. I'm going again from the right hand side, so that way my pocket opens left to right. Okay, and now that I have that on, that's perfect. And now you can continue. I'll have in the video the next step, we are basting our lining, and that will base the end of this close. In my case, because I already did it, I'm going to just restitch here basting. It's not a problem because this gets hidden, and I'm going to leave this part here because, you know, you might have forgot your pull as well. So quick way to fix it, I just unpicked it, added the pull, and we're up to the step we are basting our lining. I need to grab one of my linings that I made from the very beginnings, and I want to put that right side facing down. So this is the wrong side here. And I am going to place my exterior on top of it. And mine fits perfect. If you want to mark your centers, you can match up your centers. And that would help if yours is a little bit off. Don't stress if yours, let me see from this side. If yours is not exactly, I think I am going to mark my centers to make sure, because sometimes it gets thrown off with the pockets and stuff. If yours is not exactly even, that's okay. The most important part, actually I'm going to clip from this side because I think my exterior is a tiny bit bigger. And how that can happen or why that happens, zipper tape size 5, I believe is about, I think it's 1.25 inches generally, but depending on the brand that you're using, you might have a different measurement. And if your seam allowance wasn't 100% accurate or whatever it may be, it could throw it off. So I'm just clipping all the way around. The other thing is that like trying to lay this flat, I can feel my D-ring connector. So it should be mostly even. If it's not, you can trim down whatever panel. So base stitch it first. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to bring it to the machine and base stitch it. I think I'm going to sew with with the lining up. I was going to do exterior, but I think because how this is a little bit short here, it'd be better if I could do the lining. And then once you're done, then you can trim to make sure that they are even. All right, so I have just finished base stitching around, and I definitely recommend sewing from the lining because I was able to kind of press this out as I was going, and I could probably trim a tiny bit here, but I really don't need to trim anything off. Like I said, this D-ring here kind of creates a little bump, and then you have a pocket, so when you're trying to lay it flat and make them even, it doesn't always line up. But then once I started base stitching around, I kind of pushed everything out and it lined up perfectly. So now I'm going to trim the edge of my zipper tape and my webbing, since everything is base stitched. All right, so I have just completed this first side panel here, both the exterior and here's the lining. And so now we're going to repeat these steps for the other side panel. And I'm not going to film that because it's the same exact steps for both. All right, so I have my bias binding. I'm using fold over elastic. So I just use my centimeters to inches converter, measured out, and added some seam allowance and sewed it together. So I only have 2 raw edges. If you have the double file bias tape, you'll want it folded open. You could use waterproof canvas. You can use whatever works best to bind. So now you want to turn your main panels lining side out, and you want to make sure your main zipper, the top zipper, is open. And so now we are going to attach our bias binding. So I'm putting my seam underneath where the zipper is, so you don't see where the seam is. And we are lining up our raw edge with the edge of our bag. And I'm just slightly, with the fold over elastic, I'm just kind of slightly adding, like tugging a little bit, so there's a little bit of stretch. But you want to make sure that whatever type of bias binding for fold over elastic, waterproof canvas, whatever you're using, you're lining it up with the edge. And the other thing to keep in mind is that on the interior, we have our zipper going all the way around. So when we attach this, I'm switching out to my zipper foot. Otherwise, I won't be able to get the correct seam allowance because of the teeth. So make sure to keep that in mind as you are clipping, and then especially when you get to the sewing part. And you can add as many or as few clips as you prefer. You can see here where my, webbing. I'm just trying to singe down where it was fraying a little bit from where it's cut on the edge. And the other thing is I chose to use black fold over elastic because it blends in the best with my lining. And I prefer to use a matching thread. For this part, I'm not changing out my thread because I'm just basting it on and it's going to get fold over eventually. But when it comes time to actually fold it over, I'm going to switch to black. And that way, I always try to match my binding to my lining. So that way, if your stitching is not perfect or if it slips a little bit, it's not as noticeable. So now we're going to bring this to the machine and we are going to stitch our binding on going all the way around at the seam allowance given in the pattern. Alright, so I have my binding attached all the way around, and don't worry, this is going to get folded over eventually, so you're not going to see that stitching. So now we need to attach our side panel. So I know my top center is where this zipper is, so I kind of just fold it in half to mark my bottom center. So if you do this, you'll be able to get that. And now we need to attach our side panel. So I have the mark up top and bottom for center, and we are going to attach them right sides together. So I'm lining up my center of the top with the center of the zipper teeth. And also, if you haven't opened your zipper already, make sure you do it. And then the bottom with my bottom center mark. And now I'm just going to slowly work my way around, lining up the edges. So I like to do a few clips on the top and the bottom, like to the left and the right of the center, and then continue working my way. I'm just trying to line this up as best I can because my bias tape is a little less, or my fold over elastic's a little less than 1 inch. So it gives me very little margin of error when I need to fold it over. And I'm just working my way around, and you can see that here I'm down towards that bottom corner. And if you used accurate seam allowances, your gusset should fit your side panel perfectly. Okay, and so now I'm going to work my way around the other side. And then once I get this clipped, I'm going to take it to the machine and I am going to baste stitch it. You could follow your seam you could follow your stitching from previous. I'm just going to baste stitch it because I don't want to keep going over the same spot, and also because I don't want to go too far in because again, this is only going to fold over so far. And take your time getting this to match up. You can see that I'm having to actually push mine in to make sure that it's all aligned. Great. And I have a little bit of extra on this side, so I might have not quite marked the exact center. So I'm just kind of easing that in, which means I'm not making a crease or anything. I'm just kind of spreading out that fabric and going back over where I clipped, because you can see if it's not lined up perfectly, then you might have some extra. All right. So what appeared to me, or it appeared at first like I was going to have a whole bunch extra, I really don't, because I was able to maneuver it around. So now I'm going to bring it to the machine and I am going to baste stitch this in place. I'm probably going to sew it from this, this way here, not going with the top out. I think this way is going to be easiest. And I'm also going to keep my zipper foot on because our zipper is still along that edge. All right, so I have just attached my side panel, and if you want to check to make sure that you caught everything and it looks okay, you can turn this right sides out and kind of push everything out, and you'll be able to see if everything checks out okay. As long as it looks all right, now we can move on to the last step, which is folding over our binding. And I really should have used a larger fold over elastic. But what you're going to do is now just take your binding, fold it over those raw edges, and clip. You can see where I've eased, so I'm going to have to trim that because there's no way it's going over. So I'm going to continue folding this over off camera. So I just wanted to show you, yeah. So like some of it, I definitely needed a wider one. I'm going to have to really ease this in. And that's because this is only like a 0.75 inch, 3/4 inch fold over elastic. So that is my own problem. Okay, so I'm just going to continue clipping all the way around. And then when I'm done, I am going to take it to the machine and stitch along the edge, either side up, making sure that I'm catching it. Maybe this side up so that way I can catch it. The other thing is that when I did just sew on the side panel, I ended up doing it with the side panel down instead of up because mine was moving too much. But if depending on your material, it might be helpful to do it either way. All right, so before I bind the other side, my fold over elastic was so small, so I'm like, you know what, let me try with double fold bias tape. So I just wanted to show you that this side I'm doing with the double fold bias tape. So I have it opened up and I have aligned my raw edge all the way around. And so now I'm going to take that to the machine and stitch at that given seam allowance, sewing on that binding. And then when in the instructions it says sew it together, but I'm just going to wait till I get to the end and then kind of tuck my raw edge in. So that way when it folds, it will give me that nice clean line even without sewing it together. And I wanted to show you that there's a variety of ways to do this, and the double fold bias tape I think is going to work better because it is wider. All right, so I definitely think the double fold bias tape is better for me. So now I am going to attach this side panel the same exact way I did for the other side. And again, I found it easier because my materials were so slippery I thought I was going to sew it with the side panel up. I ended up sewing it with it down. So I'm going to sew this side as well with it down against my feed dogs. Okay, so I have just sewed on the side panel on this side here. So now with this double fold bias tape, I am just going to now fold it over. And it should go around really nicely. If you're using double fold bias tape, it should fit because of the seam allowance that we used. So yeah, this is working out much better for me. So I definitely think, at least for me, I prefer using the double fold bias tape to the fold over elastic. And so then now, once I clip all the way around, I am going to take it to the machine, and you can stitch from whatever side works better and top stitch it into place. I'm still going to use my zipper foot, and I'm going to switch out and use black thread, so that way if it doesn't like always catch or whatnot, that it doesn't show as much as if like the the variegated rainbow that I'm using. So again, just clipping all the way around. And I think I'm going to sew from this correct, like the top side again, like how I put on the side pocket.
Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely up.
All right, so I have just finished this side with the double fold bias tape, and I think that worked out much better than the fold over elastic. So I'm actually going to pick this apart and change it. So once you get your side completely binded, you want to make sure that you turn it right side out, just to make sure, and run your finger along, just to make sure that everything caught, that you didn't accidentally like sew your zipper or whatnot. You want to make sure that your side panel looks nice. And I'm really happy with how that looked. So I'm going to turn it and fix my other side. So definitely recommend the double fold bias tape over the fold over elastic. All right, so this is actually the side that I went and fixed with double fold bias tape, and I'm so happy I did. It looks way better than it did with the fold over elastic. So now you can turn your bag right side facing out. And this actually completes the duffel bag tutorial. And all we have left is if you want to make the crossbody strap. And what I do want to check is I'm going to zip this here, and I want to make sure that I did everything correctly. So if we go back to that continuous zipper here, or collapsible zipper, I don't know why I keep wanting to call it continuous. I guess because it's the longest one. I have some air in my bag, but everything should fold. All right. I'm super happy with it. How cute is this that it folds up all the way down from that big duffel bag? Hey, so excited. So now I'm just gonna finish my crossbody strap. Great. So our last step is our crossbody. So we're gonna start by taking our slider, and I'm right-handed, so I always start on the left and go up and over that center bar. And then this is seatbelt webbing, so it's pretty thin. So I like to fold it back once on itself, so I'll hide that raw edge. And then we're going to stitch it back onto the longer piece of webbing. And you could use rivets. I just like stitching because I just feel like it's more secure. So I'm going to bring it to the machine and stitch 2 lines of horizontal stitching just to make sure it's extra secure. All right, so I have just added my 2 rows of stitching. So now how I find this easiest is to keep the slider here in my left hand, and from the bottom straighten out my webbing. And this is how I'm making sure it doesn't get twisted. And I'm taking one of my snap hooks, sliding it on, and then I'm going from the right hand side up and over that center bar. And then I always, even though I was careful, I still pull it really tight to make sure that it's not twisted. And so now on this side, I am going over the top and again, folding it back on itself to hide that raw edge and then back onto the webbing. And I'm going to sew 2 vertical or horizontal stitch lines on this side to hold on that side hook. All right, so I apologize. I forgot to hit the time lapse. I just sewed the 2 lines of stitching the same exact way I did when we attached the slider. And that completes the crossbody. So now we can just attach it to our duffel bag. And now we have both the handles and the crossbody strap. And we're completely done. All right, so we have finished up our Abracaduffle. I hope you love it as much as I do. Thank you, Demi, for allowing me to film your pattern. I hope you all enjoy the tutorial. I hope you find it's helpful. If you do, please consider subscribing or giving me a thumbs up. It helps my channel grow, and I appreciate it so much. Let me know in the comments if you have made one, and I'll see you next time. Bye.